We'll begin now with part two. So this expanded edition came about when Darlene approached me about the creation of a new and expanded edition of Care for Creation in light of Loud Out to Sea. And she was particularly interested in this idea of a formation toolkit, a Franciscan Spirituality formation toolkit, because part of what the Franciscan tradition offers is not just a set of ideas, but indicating a set of actions, especially actions to be done in community with family and other members of our community. So uh, we, I thought that was a really good idea. I think that's something that makes the kind of the ideas of Laudato Si, interpreted through the lens of Franciscan theology and spirituality, translated into something practical, something that we could elaborate to help people connect with the message of and reality of Laudato Si. So, um, one of the very first ways that we can enter into this, and in fact, our first activity in the in the toolkit is diving into our garbage. What is that about, Pam? How did you get started analyzing garbage?
Yeah, way to get really practical with our spirituality, right? Um, well, that takes me back to a retreat I did probably 15 years ago. Well, it was after the book came out, so maybe not that long ago, but I was doing a retreat for a youth group in Grays Harbor, Washington, and just spontaneously we were talking all sorts of things about our relationship with the earth and how we can care for creation. And I looked over at our garbage can and saw, you know, things that should have been recycled and all sorts of things in our garbage. And I just spontaneously pulled it out and we just kind of started to take it out one piece at a time and talk about, like, if this goes to the landfill, what happens next, and what could we have done to make sure that this didn't end up in the garbage can? And that's when I really saw the light bulbs going off in not only the teens, but also the parents that were there and the adults. And it's those kinds of things where, like, the rubber hits the road. Our spirituality should be should be happening in our life. And the our throwaway culture. I just love how Saint Francis or Pope Francis talks about it, and Saint Francis. But our throwaway culture, just if there's anything that illuminates our flawed relationship with creation, it's that. And so I felt like having a chance to just in a practical way contemplate on that, but bringing our spiritual viewpoint, our spiritual lens, to something that's so ordinary and that we don't often connect to our spirituality could be a really great way to reassess our relationship with and how we treat the earth.
That Loud Out to Sea is not the only place where Pope Francis talks about this concept of a throwaway culture. A
Yeah.
throwaway culture is this idea when we're done with something, we just toss it away and send it away, and we don't think of this as no longer a part of us, or we're not responsible for either what it takes to produce something for us or what the consequences are of throwing something away. And so this throwaway culture is something that is part of Laudato Si's message, but also a bigger part of his message for saying that there's a whole problem with the consumer mindset in late stage capitalism, which doesn't pay any attention to anything other than what's immediately in front of me and my own kind of immediate needs. And so that was this is why this garbage meditation activity is has such a is so simple, a little bit gross, and really meaningful. And I explained a little bit to what exactly you do in a garbage meditation.
Yeah. So one of the things I do first is just tell the story of a friend of mine, Betty Shelley, who I was a volunteer with her through the Northwest Earth Institute, and she really inspired a lot of us at the time. She was really serious about taking all the things we were learning about our environmental crisis and applying them in her life. And so she and her husband started to try really hard to reduce their garbage. And as they kind of adopted one habit after the other, I think it was a few years later, they decided to take on the audacious goal of having one can of garbage per year and seeing if they could do it. And it just hearing her stories as she was learning how to do this, I mean, because she started with composting everything she could and recycling everything she could, but that wasn't going to be enough. So she had to totally reassess how she thought about waste and how she thought about the products that came in and left her home. And so they were able to accomplish this, and for the last 17 years have produced one can of garbage between the two of them every year, and or even less. I don't even think that she fills the whole garbage can up. But I tell that story because I feel like seeing somebody actually doing something that most of us would consider almost impossible can be a real inspiration. And so just kind of using her as a modern day guide, and then you know you can get together as a family or as a youth group or just any group that you have, and I think it's a week's worth of garbage, or maybe I think it's a week's worth of garbage, just laying it out and kind of doing what I did at that retreat, pulling out one at a time. And I even encourage you in the meditation to think about it. Like, imagine that you were Saint Francis. If he was on earth today and he looked at our throwaway culture and the effects of it and the filth everywhere, it would just be absolutely shocking to him, because this concept of waste is such a new invention. And so to just really contemplate it through kind of a spiritual lens, and thinking about where it came from, where it's going, but also the impacts on species and other humans. Um, our waste problem is stealing from the future, and it's stealing from the poor countries right now, and also the species that are losing habitat. So all these different ways that our waste connects us to the past and the future, and across the world. So um, yeah, so that's
So
a little bit about that.
you've described both, like, the activity itself and the kind of learning, the awareness, the kind of Iliad says a very good synonym for the term spirituality is awareness. So this sense
Mhm.
of ecological awareness or ecological spirituality that can be fostered by this activity. But what, like, concrete behaviors would you like to see people consider as a result of the garbage meditation activity?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can speak for myself in my process of trying to reduce my waste. Um, so just thinking about, where is this going to go? Anything, if I go and get some coffee at a coffee shop and it's in a throwaway container and I throw that away and I don't have to look at it again, but where is it going to go? And is it going to decompose? So many things that we throw away, especially our plastics problem, is so huge. It ends up, you know, in the Pacific garbage patch, or it ends up in the intestines of birds or fish. And it also, it's now in our bodies and our bloodstreams. So thinking about, really, where does this go? And in the process of it being made, what chemicals were used. And I think the statistics in the book, but I think we actually about 7 times um, the production of any product, before it even gets to us, is like 7 times more than actually if we throw that away. So just thinking about all of that these are not things that we are taught to think about. Um, so thinking about that, but then when I think about what Betty had to do, first she started to recycle everything she possibly could, and then she started to compost everything she possibly could, but then she started to only buy things in containers that she could take back to the store and refill. And so she found places where she could get frozen vegetables and frozen berries without having to buy a new package, and she could fill her own package and those kinds of things, and reusing and repurposing things. And so it takes a whole paradigm shift, and that paradigm shift is good for us. It helps us to see our connection to the world around us.
Right. So, the story of Betty is really inspiring, and I think that the challenge is that when we hear that, we sort of many people would recoil and say, "That's too much. I can't do that."
Sure.
But baby steps, start with awareness, start with making some simple choices, and if many of us get involved in this kind of, behavior shift, we begin to see real progress.
Yeah. Yeah. And in her story, she talks about how she just started by saying, I'm just going to have cloth napkins instead of paper napkins. That's where she started. And that led to the next step, to the next step, and to the next step. And you adopt one virtuous activity at a time. And pretty soon you change your lifestyle. But, just stay on the path.